Hi everyone, welcome to our Hangout on Air today where we're going to be discussing the topic destination marketing in East Africa style. I'm Sarah Robinson from the Google Travel team in New York City. We're grateful to have the partnership of Destination Accelerator and the Africa Travel Association in putting together today's event. We're also thrilled to have a fantastic group of panelists joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves so that we can get started in discussing today's topic. And Dr. Maria Mutagamba, we're going to start with you. If you could please introduce yourself.
Is she on mute?
I believe you are muted. If you could click the unmute button towards the top of your screen, that would be great so that we can hear you.
Okay, I'm Maria Mutagamba, Minister for Tourism, Wildlife and Antiquities from Uganda, and I'm happy to be with you this morning.
Great, we're thrilled to have you as well. And Stephen Asimwa, could you please introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, I'm Stephen Asime, the Chief Executive Officer of the Uganda Tourism Board, and it's a pleasure to have this discussion and meeting. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Teresa, welcome. It looks like Teresa might be frozen, so Remit, we'll go to you.
Am I unfrozen now?
You are. We can hear you, yes.
Okay, sorry about that. This is Teresa Clark. I'm the CEO of Africa.com, and I'd like to congratulate Ethan and all of you for putting together this excellent program.
Thank you, Teresa. And finally, Remit.
Thank you. This is Remit Mehta, CEO and founder of Immersion Journeys, based in New York City.
Great to have you. Excellent. And finally, we have Ethan joining us and kicking it off with the first question.
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you all for joining us. Apologies for having dropped out there. I had a few technical, few mishaps of my own. The discussion today is going to touch on a number of different things, both the assets that we want to examine a little bit as we see them and find them in Eastern Africa and East Africa and the countries of East Africa, especially represented here today by our delegates and by some of the delegation from Uganda, but also by Remit, who manages Immersion Journeys, which is a tour operator that is particularly well recognized in Tanzania. And then we'll also be looking at how travel and tourism is just one of many different kinds of commercial businesses and important pieces of the economy in the countries in particular, but also in East Africa and, of course, all across the African continent. So starting off on a strong foot, I wanted to ask especially the minister whom I welcome today and Stephen from the Ugandan Tourism Board what they consider to be Uganda's strongest points. As many people may know, but certainly as has been discussed in the news of late, Uganda got a great start in tourism about 50 years ago as the Pearl of Africa, and then went through several decades of difficulty, we'll say, but has recently reemerged as one of the shining lights, certainly in East Africa, but certainly also across the continent. So we want to look a little bit at how Uganda, after its periods of difficulty, has reemerged. What particular qualities of the tourism scape in East Africa, in Uganda, have helped Uganda rise in prominence to the place where it stands today. Madam Minister, do you want to begin and help us understand some of the wonders of Uganda?
Okay, thank you very much, and I am happy that we are getting the opportunity. Of course, Uganda is re-emerging as a tourism destination, and our niche is ecotourism, where we are basing our attractions to nature, the big five, the parks, the conservation, and the good climate. We are packaging our tourism mainly on ecotourism and nature-based tourism. Stephen, you want to add on?
Yes, thank you. I was going to say my computer is a little bit slow this morning. Stephen, if you have anything to add. Ecotourism, nature-based tourism, tell us a little bit about the wildlife opportunities, and not just the animals and the nature, but also the people. You've got, I forget, 50 plus indigenous tribal groups and people living in traditional lifestyles. But also people living in very, very modern, fantastic cities, Kampala and Entebbe and others. Tell us a little bit more about the fullscape. Remember to unmute yourself, Stephen.
Yes, I've just unmuted. Thank you very much. And like you rightly put it, we were the shining star around about 1970. We were the top destination, and then unfortunately it went rock bottom with the advent of Idi Amin. As you rightly put it, we've been growing very steadily at about 37% in the last 5 years, only second to Mozambique. And as my minister said, we have largely concentrated on nature and wildlife, but we have very, very intrinsic and very unique, pristine conditions. Number one, we are right on the equator, which provides us with a fantastic weather. Secondly, we are 1,100 feet above sea level, which provides for a hot and cool climate, which is unbeaten anywhere in the world. We have over 35% of our country covered by water mass. So we have lots of lakes, rivers, mountains, and eco-friendly atmosphere. And as pointed out earlier, we have over 56 tribal groupings, which are very, very distinctly diverse. In the southwest, you have the Batwa Pygmies, who are the shortest people in the world. And then the northeast, we have the Karamojong tribal groups, which have got above the tallest people in the world, which offers for a very interesting, diverse human comparisons, so to speak. But more importantly, our country has some of the oldest kingdom groupings in the world, over 700 years old. We still have kings passed down over the generations in our country. Over 11 of those groups still have kings. And then because of our friendly nature, we've been voted the most friendly people on the continent. And recently, we also emerged as the entertainment capital of East Africa. Our people never go to sleep 24/7. On Monday by 3 a.m., you still have a very interesting nightlife. So it's a very, very big buffet of different activities that are on offer. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. That's excellent. Madam Minister and Stephen, that's a wonderful teaser of what there is in place. Rumit, I'm not going to ask you to represent Tanzania, but you do have a great deal of experience with Tanzania. Can you give us a little bit of a sense of some of the wonders there? Tanzania and Uganda share a general region, but that's like saying that Maine and Florida share the east coast of the United States of America. What is it about Tanzania that distinguishes it?
Well, Tanzania is thank you very much for having me on board and with some rather distinguished guests. Having grown up in Tanzania and now living in New York, I obviously have a strong bias towards that particular country in the 5-region East African bloc. But I must admit that Uganda is definitely becoming front and center for my business as well. Just recently we signed a wonderful group of universities to travel to Uganda in 2015. But going back to Tanzania, the diversity offers everything from the savanna plains to the mountains to the lake that we share with Uganda, Lake Victoria, and Lake Tanganyika on the west side, and then the southern part of the country. Tanzania offers very similar opportunities in terms of the diversity of not only game viewing, but also the cultural diversity and the fact that we also have a very long coastline that we share with our neighbor to the north in Kenya as well. So from that perspective, it is a wonderful destination to visit. But I must admit, though, at the same time, the ease of travel between the East African bloc of countries, and I'll namely say the 5 East African countries that create this bloc, Uganda is becoming a lot easier to travel to as an extension to Tanzania. So that people go to Tanzania, see the safari, the Serengeti, the migration, and then they want to jump across the border very quickly within a couple of hours into Entebbe, maybe spend a night in Kampala, and then head on to see the gorillas or the chimpanzees up in Kibale and in Windi. So from that perspective, it is a very, very easy add-on as well. So that's my little sales pitch on Tanzania, and hopefully I've done something more for Uganda as well, Madam Minister.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Rumit. Now that we have a sense of the size and scope of the buffet, the East African buffet, I wanted to take time now to talk a little bit more specifically about the challenges of destination marketing, which is the topic of this particular hangout. Every country and every region within a country is in competition with every other country and every other region of every other country when trying to attract the attention of the traveling consumer. East Africa has, as has already been discussed, magnificent wildlife, incredible nature, fantastic human culture. How is it that, certainly in the last few years, your work in Uganda has helped? What have you done? What specifically, what strategies have you used to raise the profile of Uganda in the way that you have so that it has become the center of attention? That could be everything from leveraging particular assets to choosing different channels to communicate those assets, to using certain kinds of individual champions, celebrities. What have you done to help give East Africa in general, but certainly Uganda in specific, the quality, the public quality that it has today? Madam Minister, do you want to share any ideas?
Yeah, thank you very much. Definitely it has not been easy, but we have all the determination. One of the strategy was to engage all stakeholders, make sure that tourism is inclusive. So we have had mass mobilization within the country, but at the same time with stakeholders like airlines. The inflow of airlines into Uganda of late is on the increase. Now major airlines are running into Uganda. That is an achievement. So connectivity has become easy, and we are still working on that to make sure that connectivity becomes even much easier and reduces on the cost of traveling to Uganda. Another area has been the hospitality industry, especially hotels. There is now more space for hotels, for accommodation than ever before, and that is something that we are striving to make sure that the hotels are of the standard that are required by the international traveler. So that is something that we have also worked on. But most importantly, we have rejuvenated the sector by giving capacity within the ministry and the stakeholders, having training sessions to make sure that people know what they have to deliver. And I think that is something that my chief executive there, Mr. Sime, can add on to.
Thank you. That's great. Stephen, might I also ask, when you add your thoughts to the ministers, there's a question that's been asked about the extent to which you are working with media, and very specifically with bloggers, travel bloggers, in trying to push the message out about the assets and qualities and beauties of your country. So whatever you wanted to say as follow-up to the minister's thoughts, but also about how you have worked with media and specifically with bloggers, if you could bring that in as well.
Right.
much. That's a good pitch by my minister. First of all, just to compliment Mr. Ramit, Uganda and Tanzania are part of the East African community. I don't think we are really in a competition, even though there is an element of competition, if you like. But I think there's more to do with complementarity and competitiveness. We complement each other as neighboring countries. Tanzania and Uganda are signatories of the East African Community Protocol. We are part of the Lake Victoria Basin Council, which essentially we share issues to do with conservation on our borders. And my minister, her constituency actually shares a border with the Tanzanian people. So, and we go a long way as brothers in the region. But coming back to how we're strategizing for our country, like I said earlier, we have had a very tough past, and so our government essentially built, in terms of foundations, tried to fix the infrastructure in terms of roads, railway, the air transport, which has now been significantly upgraded, which then offers a very, very comfortable transport connectivity in the country. My organization, the Uganda Tourism Board, has been specifically charged with quality control. So we're into grading and we're into classification and we're looking at things like registration. And our teams are just back from Tanzania, where we have an East African community benchmarking facility where we try to upgrade our hotels and lodges. We are very, very much conscious that we have our foundational niche is conservation and wildlife. So we are very, very much a part of a very strong conservation strategy, ensuring that we don't have poaching, and the communities around the national parks and the game reserves and the natural wildlife areas, we make sure that they are kept in very pristine, and the communities around actually benefit to the extent that then that allows our wildlife and all these assets kept in very, very pristine conditions. We have now embarked on a bigger strategy on spending, on promotions, advertising, and to this extent, we are upgrading our websites and our portals, and we are in the process of also getting our young tourist private sector groups together. We're doing a lot of training, capacity building, customer care, best practices, trying to put them in place. We are upgrading our hospitality school. It's called the HTTI, the Hospitality Tourism and Training Institute, to make it give our people at all levels, from managerial to middle staff to lower entry, to get exposed to training capacities and try and get our visitors to have a very good feel. But we have a four-pronged strategy. We have a domestic tourism marketing strategy, because many Ugandans have not even traveled inside their country, far from even when you get visitors from the international countries. And then we have a regional strategy. Those are the members around our countries, to ensure that each of our country member states visit each other. We have a Pan-African strategy. Many African states have not visited each other. And then obviously we are part of an international marketing strategy. Right now as we speak, we are trying to have a big conference coming in November, the ATA conference, and through such medium we're able then to sell the country and expose. We're getting a permanent representative in all the major countries for representation in the media, in tour and travel companies. And it's a growing step. It's still early, and we're looking to our neighbors to share ideas like Kenya and Tanzania, which have had a much longer peaceful and discussion on these areas.
Fantastic. Thank you for that background, Stephen. And that lends itself well to another question that's just come in from the public. You mentioned your partnership with ATA, and Jim is also wondering, what other resources and organizations do you look to for destination marketing research and also professional development?
Yeah, that is just probably just to tell you, tourism used to be part of a bigger ministry. It was part of the tourism trade and industry. Now, in 2008, through an act of parliament, they were able then to establish a tourism act, which then established a tourism ministry, fully fledged independent ministry. And as we speak right now, we have an independent budget as a Ministry of Tourism. We're working very closely with a donor community like the World Bank in order to ensure that we get more resources. Tourism contributed almost 10% of GDP. And yet, if you look at the spending in tourism versus the amount of money that came in, there's a very, very big disconnect. So as a part of the engagement, the government and the parliament and the Ministry of Finance have given more resources to the Ministry, to the tourism. And right now, as we speak, we're about to start a process of engaging these representatives. We're putting in a lot of money in research. We're looking at capacity building. We're looking at ways of engaging more players to be a part of this bigger discussion, because tourism actually is one of the biggest employers in our country. Now, as the products grow, we are looking at product development. We're looking at bringing in finance. We're looking at getting more product development around areas that actually make us very, very competitive. So it's a growing process, and our minister and the establishment is very, very keen to grow this initiative.
Thank you for that. Want to turn it again to Rumit in Tanzania. Some of the questions that have been asked that might be useful from your perspective, because you come at it not just from a governmental or quasi-governmental perspective. You are a commercial operator. What resources have you used as you try to reach out? And the question that was asked earlier, how have you used media, and in particular bloggers, in trying to share the message about the work that you do, but also about the power of the destination itself?
Thanks. You know, our approach is very much in line with what most in the industry do. You know, we have our own outreach that we do using much of the social media platforms, particularly through our website, through our Twitters and Facebook. I try to write my own blog as much as I possibly can and find the time in between things. I must admit that we have not been very forceful when it comes to getting independent bloggers to write about us, simply because it's one of the strategies that we haven't had an opportunity to implement. But we are very actively begun to do a very general outreach to people who have shown interest, to say, you know, when we go, if they want to write about some of the work that we've done in terms of marketing, or in some of the new product lines that we have brought on board. So, for example, you know, we are promoting in Tanzania a very unique photography trip with a celebrity photographer. And we already have had 2 or 3 people come to us and express interest in not only joining the group, but also being sort of our eyes and ears on the ground. So those are some of the more proactive things that we've done. We also ask our clients, for example. Nothing better than asking our clients to trumpet our achievements and showing them exactly what we had promised that we would show, and they're meeting their expectations. And at the same time being very forthcoming with them to say that if you didn't particularly appreciate certain things, please feel free to comment on that as well. I mean, we're obviously a little bit we're a little bit sensitive on those kind of negative issues as well. But we've realized that our clients have been our biggest ambassadors when they write about them. We have one particular client who is a food critic, and every time she does a trip with us, which is once every couple of years, she makes sure that she does nothing but write. I sometimes even wonder the amount of writing she does while on the trip, how many hours she's spending writing and watching game at the same time. It's kind of scary how much time she spends on that. So that is really the current approach that we've begun to take, is really using our clients as our ambassadors. Today, fortunately, thanks to technology, people pretty much can be anywhere in Africa, provided they have at least 2 bars on their Wi-Fi signal, and post and get the message out there real time. simply because people have a 3.5 minute attention span, and if they don't post today and wait till they come back from the trip, chances are that most of their followers have moved on to other things. So we have really become very, very, very conscious, and I must say I was not a huge believer in it, but in the last year or two, having seen the instant reaction, the instant gratification of people promoting the destinations we sell, and goes beyond Tanzania. It really, really makes a tremendous difference in how people immediately gratify themselves, comment on it, react on it, and then move on to something else. So what we're doing is trying to capture that moving target, that constantly people are looking for new information and new ideas. And believe it or not, sometimes we've had clients who've been on a trip, they've tagged something, they've written about something, they've blogged about something, and somebody says, oh, gee whiz, next week I'm actually going to be in that area, and I'm so glad you mentioned it, and I'm going to make sure that we're going to comment. Not necessarily my clients, it could be somebody else's clients. So that's something very wonderful about it.
That's great, thank you. There's a lot of, several topics have been raised that I'd like to bring Teresa in on. Teresa, as the face and voice, or one of the faces and voices of Africa.com, is a digital tool looking at more than just tourism, travel and tourism in Africa. The minister and also Stephen raised the power of tourism as an industry in its contribution to GDP, but also to training and skills development. And then the discussion has also turned to the importance of telecommunications, personal telecommunications, people on their mobile phones pushing out the message. Teresa, do you want to help us begin to try to contextualize all of this, travel and tourism in Africa, and general perceptions of Africa, messaging and messages about Africa as a continent, but also specifically about the region and the countries here? I know that's a big question, but I know you're up to it.
That's okay. Thank you. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, just fine.
All right. Well, it's been a fascinating conversation so far, and greetings to the minister. I think that much of what we've heard so far has been very consistent with what we see at Africa.com, particularly around East Africa and the role that East Africa is taking on the continent. When we look at the challenges that Africa faces as a continent, one of the biggest challenges is integration. The fact that there are 54 countries, 54 currencies, 54 borders. This creates a lot of inefficiencies in many regards. And there are regional associations in Southern Africa, West Africa, and East Africa. And I think that all of the observers of these regional efforts would all agree that the East African community is the one that is the most functional of the three regions. Certainly the East African community has accomplished a lot so far and has a lot on its agenda, including a single visa, which would be wonderful for tourists to be able to get one visa and travel throughout that region. I know also on that agenda for the years to come would be a common currency for East Africa, and all of the different elements of operating as a bloc. Certainly the European Union has seen the benefits from a tourism perspective as operating as one bloc, whereby tourists can come into France and travel freely through Italy and Switzerland and Germany, etc. And I think that that type of cooperation, regional cooperation among the East African countries, is likely to yield the same type of benefits for the East African community. I think there are just many exciting things about East Africa. I think East Africa is really emerging in its own right today. Certainly 10 years ago, the focus was very heavily on South Africa. I think that over time, people have come to appreciate the beauty and the opportunities in East Africa for global travelers who've been everywhere and seen everything. Many of them have checked the South Africa box and are looking to find the next place to go on the continent, and East Africa often serves as that next place. I think that in addition to that, you have a lot of exciting developments in the technology space. Certainly Kenya has been named the Silicon Savannah, And so I think that that creates, for people who want to be connected while they're traveling, the opportunity to remain in touch with home is a good thing, as well as the opportunity for local bloggers to get online and tell more about their region, which I think travelers also really appreciate being able to hear firsthand. So those are some of the things that I think are exciting about the East African community as it relates to tourism.
Wow. Rose to the challenge, Teresa. Thank you. Sarah, did you have something particular? I saw you just unmuted. I didn't want to step on you.
Yeah, no, I thought it was a great time to bring in another question from the Q&A that was posted. So definitely something that Africa is well known for, both South Africa and the entire continent, is wildlife and the diversity and just magnificence of the wildlife and the continent. Madam Minister or Stephen, could you share some of the history of the Uganda Wildlife Authority and how it works in developing tourism in the country's parks and protected areas?
Okay, thank you very much. Uganda Wildlife Authority is an agency within the Ministry of Tourism, Wildlife and Antiquities, and the mandate is conservation, and they are responsible for the 10 national parks, 12 national parks, and 10 game reserves. And on top of that, they are responsible for the wildlife, even in the public, in the private engagements. They are the people who have maintained our tourism as of now, because as I said, our main MasterCard has been ecotourism. We have got the most popular sport that is called the Bwindi. It's one of the oldest forests, but this is the home of the mountain gorilla, where Uganda hosts more than 54% of the world population of the mountain gorilla. And this is our MasterCard in tourism. But at the same time, we've got the other big five, talking about the elephants, the tigers, and all the hippos. So we have Uganda Wildlife Authority as the agency that has been at the forefront for tourism. And of course, UTB, that is Uganda Tourism Board, is the marketeer of the Uganda wildlife product. And Mr. Simwe can add to the value of what Uganda Wildlife Authority has been contributing to tourism. Mr. Simwe.
Yeah, thank you very much for that brief. Like my minister said, Uganda's tourism product is largely wildlife and nature. Now, what's very interesting about that is that we have a variety of products on offer. To the southwest, we have the mountain gorillas, but we also have one of the world's largest concentrations of primates. That is monkeys, apes, chimpanzees, baboons, in a very, very strategic nature reserve called the Kibale. And then we have, like my minister said, 10 national parks distributed across the country. We have game reserves. And then at the entry of the country, we have a place called the Uganda Wildlife Education Center, which essentially has all the wildlife in a much smaller facility. We're now saying we want each region of Uganda, all the 5 regions of Uganda, north, east, west, central, to have a wildlife education center. Uganda is home to over 50% of Africa's bird species and over 11% of all the world species. All these live in protected areas, but what is very important is that these have to be sustainable. And sustainability means that you engage the local community to be like the ombudsman, so to speak, of these facilities. They share a specific percentage of the revenue with the local community, and that ensures continuity, ensures preservation, it ensures there's conservation in the long term. And what the Uganda Wildlife Authority has done is that the revenues that accrue from these facilities actually help the community. So they build schools, health centers, they've done infrastructure, and the district authorities actually benefit directly. And so there is a connection between the local community and the preservation of this. But secondly, we've also set up learning centers for how to train people engaged in how to sustain some of these facilities. So people come, they are trained, and then they act as rangers, and then they teach people around the communities on how to preserve. I'll give you a very quick example. In the southwest, where you find the mountain gorillas, there was a wildlife human conflict. And so what they did is they planted tea projects along the borderlines of the gorilla sanctuary. And what happens is that gorillas don't actually eat tea leaves. And so the community was able to grow the tea plantations, and then they acted as a buffer. So they actually make money from the tea, they act as guides, and there is no longer any conflict that comes out from these two, and it's been very, very successful. We are trying to see how then we can have this kind of model shared with the other parts of the country where they may not necessarily exist, but it's certainly been a very, very successful project in some of the areas. Obviously, we still have challenges of poaching, but we're finding a way out of that.
And before you end up, I would like to add that you cannot talk about conservation in Uganda and forget Kidepo National Park. That is one of the best, well-kept conservation area in the world, and that is our MasterCard for us. So whoever travels to Uganda and they really enjoy conservation, you just have to visit Kidepo. And on the other hand, we are encouraging Ugandans to farm, to do animal farming, so that you don't really have to go, if you don't have time to go to the parks, we are encouraging farmers so that they can keep farms nearby, and that will encourage our children to be able to visit these animals, learn about them, but at the same time, learn about conservation. Thank you.
Thank you both for those comments. That is very useful. My particular passion is responsible and sustainable travel, so it is always very important to hear about the conservation and sustainable travel efforts that are being made. I want to turn to some of the other things we had hoped to discuss, and those are the challenges that you've faced. You have, as a region, but also as a country, faced some interesting historical challenges, but there are also contemporary challenges. One of the questions that has been asked is top of mind today, and that is about the Ebola outbreak, which is, of course, thousands of miles away in West Africa. People's sense of geography is not always as good as it should be. The question is very specifically whether or not you have detected any impact on visitor numbers in Uganda, or perhaps Remit also through your tours in other parts of East Africa. I also would be remiss in not bringing in some of the questions specific to Uganda about recent parliamentary policy singling out different parts of the population and their personal practices, and whether or not that has been helpful to Uganda or hurtful to Uganda in its pursuit of serving as an interesting market for all comers. I don't know who wants to tackle that first.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
I'll come in first. About Ebola, yes, about 2-3 years ago we had Ebola, but we were able to react and control it, and now Uganda is free of Ebola, and definitely we have got the means to control at the first sight. But I must say West Africa and East Africa are miles and miles apart, just like California is to New York. So definitely what is happening in West Africa has got nothing to do with what is happening in Uganda. I want to encourage everybody to travel to the East African area, and in particular Uganda, there is no Ebola. Now for about that, whether I am a member of Parliament. Stephen?
Yeah, my minister rightly said we're free of Ebola. There is absolutely no trace of it in our country, and but I think the biggest challenge we have right now, as far as the Ebola issue is concerned, is that there's I think, and largely an American challenge. The country, we have 54 states in Africa. They are completely far from each other, and there seems to be a challenge on perception that, you know, if one incident happens in one corner of Africa, then the whole of Africa actually is, you know, has a problem. So that is one. One is that there's lack of information. There's a lack of, and there's misinformation and misrepresentation. That's one of the things. For instance, we have a challenge of insecurity. So when war broke up in North Africa, many people cancelled traveling to some parts of Africa, and yet really there's two distinct, very, very far from each other. So lack of information, misinformation, travel advisories still have very, very old information. I think we have a challenge of embassies sending out very, very wrong or misrepresented information. You know, that needs to be corrected. There's a perception problem about Africa, and especially some areas, ignorance, security. But we are also up against, as a small country, you need lots of resources to really market your country. For instance, what some countries like South Africa spend on tourism are way, 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 way much higher than what we have as a country. And so sometimes we cannot compete, put up billboards in some of the subways in the country, on television. So we are still small economies with a very, very, very pristine product. But the challenge right now is we don't have as many resources to get over it. However, that said, we have introduced a strategic approach to having what we call, we are now part of the East African tourist visa, and I think it was Teresa who pointed out about the regional capacities coming together. We have started something called the East African Community Visa, which essentially enables people to travel to Uganda, Kenya, and Rwanda on a single tourist visa, single entry, multiple entry, a facility that is only $100, and that helps us. Now, I must point out that on the issue of regulatory framework and some of the things that have been happening in our country, yes, a law came out concerning different feelings about, you know, about the gay bill, and but very interestingly, that was quashed by our judicial system. There was a constitutional court that made a ruling against that. Now, you must appreciate that we are a country that is growing, we have a history, we have a culture, but we are also part of an international justice system, and so a lot of that has been addressed. And for us at the Tourism Board, we urge people to visit our country. It's a justice in the system, and we feel and we're putting out there that there's a good message coming out of our country. Our president is behind it. There may be debates here and there of different sections of the country, but I mean, Uganda is the friendliest country on the continent. There is no way we have a hate campaign. We are a friendly nation. We are a country on the move, and everything is working to make a positive image out there, despite the challenges that we have had.
Teresa, thank you for that, Stephen and Madam Ambassador. Teresa, perception is a big thing that you work with a lot at Africa.com. Perception of Africa as a people think of Africa as a country rather than as a continent. Ebola is a perfect example of that. Even you put out something not too long ago about the forum convened by Obama that brought many of the African leaders to Washington, D.C., and how even within the political sphere people were not necessarily clear on the geography and the perceptions that can be manhandled by geography. How does that fit into the work that you do and you know, travel, tourism, perceptions? What happens in North Africa isn't what happens in East Africa. An outbreak in West Africa isn't going to have any impact on East Africa. A truck that turns over in Kenya, as happened last night, that killed and injured a few foreign tourists, is that going to crush tourism in East Africa or in South Africa for the next several weeks because people have perceptions about security, road security in East Africa and Africa in general? How do how do you at Africa.com and how do people who speak for Africa as a continent, but also the different regions and countries, how do you work against those misperceptions, those broad, sweeping misperceptions?
It's a very good question. I think probably all of us on this call are involved in that effort in some regard. And I'll be happy to speak about how we address it. I think tourism is a unique realm because you really are asking people to put their own personal security on the line. And so it's one thing to talk about these matters from a policy perspective in Washington. It's another thing when people are going to put themselves on a plane, take their loved ones, and go someplace. And it's important for them to have very clear information and the best information. And so we have recently launched on Africa.com a set of travel pages. We have one for each country on the continent and one for many of the major cities. I think it's a total of about 70 pages. We certainly have one for Uganda, for Tanzania, for Kenya, etc. And one of the things that we have done around these issues of safety is we have shared with our users what Africa.com's staff and board members use as we travel around the continent and think about safety. We think that the UK government has the best safety information available. It is very timely, it is updated very frequently, and it comes to the table with a real-world perspective. The UK government travel department assumes that you are going to travel to Africa, as opposed to the travel and State Department mandates that come from other Western countries. It assumes that you are going to travel and then just wants to make you aware of the issues that you might encounter while you are there. And so we really think that that is one of the best sources of information as tourists are considering a trip to the continent. We also look at the Mo Ibrahim Index, which is not as dynamic, isn't updated as frequently, but on a once-per-year basis, the Mo Ibrahim Foundation looks at safety and security for each of the African countries. And what we really like about the Mo Ibrahim Index is that it is done by Africans, and so it removes a certain Western bias, and we think, again, provides a more accurate assessment. We've also come up with what we've I'm very proud of the work that we've done in travel at Africa.com. We also have a business traveler's guide to the 10 major cities because we want to be realistic while encouraging people to travel. So, for example, we would never encourage a business traveler who has never been to Nigeria to fly into Lagos and look for a cab at the airport. That just would not be a wise thing to do. And so in our travel guides, we have provided that information to tourists to say that when traveling to specific locations, we've taken all the knowledge and expertise that we have in traveling the continent and shared it with our visitors. And so I think it's that type of information, when having accurate information from people who assume that you are going and simply want to give you good tips. And appreciate the difference between flying into Lagos and flying into Cape Town. You know, the risk factors are very different, as different as flying into Nairobi and flying into Accra. So that's the way I would say we try to do. I think accurate information from friendly sources that support the notion of tourism to Africa is probably the best that we can do in providing visitors with the right way to calibrate reality versus perception.
That's great. Thank you. Rumit, I want to let you weigh in on this before we come to our final question, as we have only 10 minutes left. Briefly, do you want to let us know how any of these challenges, safety, security, certainly safety and security, but also the issues of health, have impacted your commercial work in trying to not just promote the region, but also convince people to travel to that region?
The short answer is yes. In this business, every small incident can blow up in a way that could be a detriment to my side of the business, which is us trying to manage expectations of clients, because my job is to manage expectations of clients. and also trying to give them, like what Teresa said, the most neutral yet accurate piece of information without getting into trouble later on. Regarding Ebola, we are all holding our breath. We've seen what Kenya Airways has done by shutting down flights, considering Nairobi is a big hub, because we know that it has a huge impact if we have a single case come into East Africa or South Africa, for that matter. So I will not say it has impacted my numbers, but I must say that we have received many inquiries about whether the client should be concerned. I'm pleased to report that I do have clients leaving in the next couple of days who expressed concern a few weeks ago, but now seem to be packing their bags. Obviously, the West African region is the hotbed. We do very little work over there. I do work in Ghana. Fortunately, it has not been affected, but that is, for lack of a better term, that is one country that I would say I could deliberately tell clients, if you have any concern, maybe you should not be going there. But East and Southern Africa, we have not seen any significant impact. Just a lot more, sort of inquiry about and teaching them the geography of where West Africa is versus where East Africa is. In terms of the bills that have passed in Uganda, we have watched it very closely. I must admit that it is allow me to be a little bit more forthcoming. It is unfortunate what has happened. We have received questions about that, about why and what, and fortunately, because of having grown up in Africa, we all understand the cultural nuances mixing in with the politics of the country versus the orthodoxy of people's beliefs, and I try to stay away from politicizing. I feel tourism it should not be used as a political tool. I leave all those decisions up to the client, whether they want to go there because of a parliamentary bill that has been passed. It's totally up to them. Do I have my own opinions about it? Sure, I do. But I'm not going to let that interfere with about how my business is going to operate. It is a subjective topic left for other more professionals to work on. And so we are constantly watching. We are doing exactly what Teresa said. We have our on-the-ground intelligence as we speak. We never take anything that the State Department or the British government or the Australian government travel advisories give us at face value. We take that information, we ask our guys on the ground. At the end of the day, all my partners that work on the ground have the same interest that I do to make sure that we give good, clear, concise, and unadulterated information to allow the client to make a decision. And our clients are all very well traveled. I mean, they're paying a lot of money to go there, and therefore they are all intelligent enough to make a decision on their own.
Thank you, Rumit. And since we're running out of time, we're going to wrap it up with a forward-looking question. This question comes from the Q&A posting. Can you all, and I'll open this up to all of the panelists, give any details on your marketing campaigns for the next 12 months? Are there particular events or assets that you'll really be focusing on in the end of 2014 and looking into 2015?
I can start if you want, unless there's a protocol.
Great, go ahead.
We are now already looking well into 2015. Again, in my business, 2014 is over. If you haven't booked your travel by now, you might as well look into it next year. So we're looking into 2015 calendar year, we target several sectors and affinity groups. So we have the regular retail clients, families, and then we have group travel. And what we're doing for the group travel is we're targeting going after a little bit more emerging destinations. It's very easy for us, not to toot my horn, but it's very easy for us to sell Tanzania and South Africa right now. Kenya gets worrisome due to the more security issues going on the coast. So we are looking into emerging markets. And in my first question that I answered, I said, we're very pleased to tell the ministry that, we have an alumni group from Princeton University that is looking at Uganda as a possible destination for next year, late into next year. So, you know, they want to do the chimpanzees, and it is an emerging destination. They've already done Kenya, they've done Tanzania, they've done South Africa, till they're sick. So now they're looking into a new destination, and so our whole strategy for 15 is, unless the world completely collapses around us, is to really go into tried and tested but unique destinations with unique experiences, and that's our entire marketing plan.
Excellent. Madam Minister, would you like to follow that up with any specific plans for events or assets that you'll be focusing on to market Uganda in 2015?
Okay, thank you very much. Definitely we, at the moment, and that's why we are here, we are focusing on the African Travel Association Congress, the 39th Congress that is going to take place in Kampala from 11th to 16th in November, and we have been moving from one city to another to make sure that we drum up support and participation in this meeting. So we look forward to all the African, we have already invited most of the African ministers of tourism to come to this meeting, and some of our major stakeholders internationally, but we are also looking forward to the members of the ATA from the US to participate in this meeting. It's going to be one of our major events, but on top of that, we have got other events that take place annually. We've got the Uganda Matters Day for people interested in faith tourism. It takes place every 3rd of June, and it is one major event that has become now regional, attracting tourists from all over the continent, and we are now focusing to the international tourists who can also come and attend that one. But at the same time, we are also looking at promoting the cultural tourism. We want people to know more about our culture, about our lifestyle, and this is something that is ongoing, and we went through it by mobilizing the different clusters of Uganda, because they've got a number of tribes, but with similar cultures. So we have clustered those cultures, and each cluster is a destination in its own, or you can have a circuit by itself so that you can spend your 5, 6, or 7 days to visit that particular culture. We've got the Ankole culture, we've got the Batoro culture and the Mount Rwenzori, we've got the Bagisu culture and the Mountain Elgon, where we have over 1,000 waterfalls. We've got the and we've got the Northern culture, we've got the West Nile, and the history of Emini Pasha. We've got the Karamajong tribe, where we have got the lights of Masai, and it is an exciting. So all those are packages that we offer, but I believe my marketeer there, Mr. Simwe, should be able to expound on that. Thank you. Mr. Simwe?
Thank you very much for that question. Uganda is essentially a country that is hidden. It is unexploited. It's one of those rare gems, and we look at ourselves as a unique, pristine, undiscovered, unventured territory. Obviously, we have a history that is very, very synonymous with a lot of, the Idi Amin story. It's been our biggest brand, and one of the things we are trying to do now is to establish an Idi Amin circuit, which is something we are on the drawing boards. We want to have there's this guy called Idi Amin, and he's been very, very unique historically. He in one point in the 10 years that he was president, 9.5 if you like, we just shook the whole world, and we are saying that's going to be a product. But over and above that, we are a very, very pristine country. Wildlife, natural reserves, we have the crater lakes, the mountains. My minister enumerated the issue of the culture. We have a very rich history, very rich heritage, and those are some of the products we are preparing. But for the first time, Uganda is venturing into destination marketing. And we have, in the next 3 months, we're putting our sights on the US and Canadian markets for North America. We're We're looking at the United Kingdom, which has been our traditional market, and an island. We're looking at Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. We're looking at the Benelux countries. We're looking at the eastern, the emerging markets in Asia, in China, in Japan, Korea. We're also looking in the next years to Caribbean markets, the United Arab Emirates. We're looking at Qatar. We're working very closely with the airlines, and we're also seeing that Uganda's position on the equator, which gives a very, very fantastic climate. We're looking at new products like golf tourism. So far in the next 6 months, we're going to host almost 4 tournaments right in the city of Kampala and Entebbe. We're going to host the Zone 6, which is the East Central and Southern African Golf Challenge. So product development, new markets, new resources, and we're also talking about regional initiatives, which essentially help us to galvanize as a region, because all of the East African countries combined don't come anywhere near South Africa. If you combine the total African inbound numbers, they don't come anywhere near some of the numbers in the US that you have. So my personal belief is that marketing in a very, very segregated, smaller units is not very helpful for a country. So initiatives like what we are doing in East Africa, we're calling it the borderless borders, where one visa essentially gets you into all the markets. And our embassies, we've now considered them as initial points of entry. You don't have to go to 3 countries to get a visa. One visa is enough to get you around all the East African countries. The region has gone into a common market. We are going into a monetary union. And as Teresa said earlier, we are looking at a single currency for East Africa. For me, those are very, very essential things that will help more visitors come to our country. Yes, we can compete, but we need just be competitive and galvanize our resources as a region. More importantly, getting infrastructure, fix things that inhibit travel, ease of speed of getting visas. Our embassies, we are training them right now as we speak. We're going around all our embassies and foreign missions abroad, educating them about the need to treat the customer, the traveler, give them best information, have accessible information, have best practices in our hotels. We're looking at very seriously improving on our airline and connectivity, having a hub, and also trying to get us to be an affordable destination. East Africa is still a very, very expensive destination. And so we're talking to the airlines, we're looking at travel industry players and trying to ensure that we make our region, our country, the most favorable destination. And because we are pristine and undiscovered, we're saying, come and visit us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Sounds like very ambitious and exciting plans for 2015. Teresa, do you want to wrap it up here with with your plans as well for the coming year?
Yes. Are you able to hear me okay?
We're not able to hear you now.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that.
No problem.
In any case, yes, we are in a little bit of a different space because we don't actually organize travel per se, and most of what we do is online. And so we are really going to be out there this year looking to make sure that people know about the resources we have on Africa.com to learn about travel and to learn about each of the countries. And that's what I'm really, really excited about. We've launched these new country pages which provide live Twitter feeds for each country. We also have our proprietary videos that show a picture for each country or show an image, moving images for each country. We have our top 10 things to do in each country for tourists, and just a variety of really dynamic content, including all of the most recent blog posts that we've had for each country. We curate news on a country-by-country basis, and we choose the best stories. We also have a top 10 travel newsletter, which we put out every Friday, where our editors look for the best stories about traveling in Africa. And it's free, and so we hope that everyone here will sign up for it. It's really a very dynamic newsletter to receive that provides all sorts of information about new destinations, new hotels, new experiences that one can have in traveling across the continent. And it's been very well received. And again, it's free. Come to africa.com and sign up for our travel newsletter.
Great. We'll definitely keep our eye out for the newsletter and check that out on africa.com, and also the travel guides that you mentioned earlier on in the program. So I want to thank all of our viewers for joining. It's been a fantastic conversation. We really appreciate all of your questions, and fortunately couldn't get to all of them, but we'll do our best to get answers posted on the Google Travel G+ page. Thank you very much, Ethan, for putting together this fantastic group and doing a wonderful job moderating the event. Thank you to all of our panelists. Madam Minister, it's a privilege to have you here. Mr. Asimwa, your perspective has been fantastic. Thank you for joining. Remit,
thank you very much.
Thank you. Remit, thank you for all your perspective on Tanzania and your experiences in living in Tanzania and also the U.S. And finally, Teresa, it's been wonderful to meet you, to have you here, and to bring into perspective of the entire Africa continent and all of the information that you produce on africa.com. So thank you, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you again at some point in the future.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
And visit Uganda. Please come to Uganda. Come to East Africa. Come to Africa.
Thank you.